Hello, dear listeners. We wanted to re-release this two-part series from last year in a single episode because it's become incredibly relevant in a new context. Right now, we're seeing similar gang-related excuses used to identify immigrants as gang members in order to justify abducting them off the street and sending them to either U.S. detention centers or to the Terrorism Confinement Center in El Salvador with no due process. As we know, many of those taken have not committed any crimes, but have been retroactively deemed members or associates of dangerous gangs, and even as terrorists, all based on incredibly flimsy evidence like tattoos. This, although incredibly alarming, is actually straight out of the American playbook. From the 1980s into the 2000s and into this very day, mostly Black and Latino adults as well as minors were accused of being in violent gangs with similar flimsy evidence in order to justify far harsher sentences for the same crimes that non-gang members were committing, and also to strip away the rights of entire low-income communities. Coming side by side with the disastrous war on drugs, an episode we put out back in 2018 that continues to be relevant as part of our new gang narrative today, these two panics helped to create the highest rate of imprisonment in the world right here in the USA. It also feels important to mention that even if someone is somehow associated with a gang, that can mean so many things, as these episodes will hopefully demonstrate, and has never been a crime in and of itself, no matter what those in power seem to imply. The gang initiation series you are about to hear is in the context of the urban legends that many of us heard growing up in the 1990s, but it shows how the outrageously exaggerated idea of violent, murderous gangs coming for innocent Americans has been used by both Republicans and Democrats, by federal, state, and local forces to further their own careers through the ever-popular, ever-racist, and ever-classist law and order agenda. We hope that these episodes can illuminate our present moment and help people understand the alternate realities that are being created right before our eyes in order to justify not just deporting, but disappearing human beings with no due process. So now, we have to keep each other safe. We encourage you to go to immigrantjustice.org/knowyourrights for more information and research how to responsibly report potential ICE raids in your state. Now, here is our two-part episode called Gang Initiations. Thank you for listening. Just a heads up, this episode contains descriptions of violence. Welcome to the Urban Legends Hotline, where we investigate the mysterious tales of your hometowns and stories passed through the old lockered halls of your schools to get to the haunted heart of the urban legends that you grew up hearing and maybe even telling. Today we are covering gang initiations. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and from one friend of a friend to another, this is American Hysteria.
Hi, Chelsey. This is Elizabeth. I was a teenager in Omaha, Nebraska in the 1990s. You know how when you're driving at night in the dark, and the polite thing to do when you see another car who's forgotten to turn on their lights, the polite thing to do is to flash your headlights at them so they'll turn it on. Well, for some reason in Omaha in the 90s, there was this urban legend that if you were to flash your lights at night like this, that there was a gang initiation happening, and that if you flashed your lights at another car, a gang member would have to shoot you. I don't know where this came from. I don't know the origin of this. It's really silly and I think in retrospect fundamentally racist. But I was wondering if this might be a good topic for your urban legends shows. Thanks. Bye-bye.
In August of 1993, parents, school officials, newsrooms, fire stations, and police departments across America began receiving faxes on official-looking letterhead, warnings about a blood initiation weekend set for the 25th and 26th of September. Many took these warnings seriously and continued the chain, faxing and emailing these warnings out to everyone they knew, printing and sending them through the mail, even posting copies as flyers around town. The story went like this. Members of the gang, known as the Bloods, were planning to cruise dark highways with their headlights off, waiting for another driver to flash theirs as a courtesy. But these dark headlights were not an accidental oversight. No. This was a monstrous trap aimed at innocent good Samaritans in a sociopathic rite of passage called Lights Out. The prospective gang bangers would screech out a violent U-turn, follow the driver, and try to murder them, either by forcing them off the road or shooting them through their window. All so that they could land themselves a coveted spot in the local branch of a nationally organized, heartless, and bloodthirsty street gang. I remember this urban legend vividly, as it flashed up several times in the 1990s, and I had no reason to believe it wasn't true. After all, I was in elementary school, and teachers all over the country were warning kids like me that if we wore blue or red, we might be mistaken for a member of the Bloods or their rival gang, the Crips, maybe even shot to death right there in my quiet suburban neighborhood, all for this mistaken allegiance. I've been hoping for a while that someone would call in to the Urban Legends hotline with this one, but I knew that when I finally dove into the history, there was going to be a whole lot of difficult stuff under the surface of this bogus but extremely potent piece of contemporary folklore, a tale that was most popular in the 80s and 90s, when stopping gang violence was one of the hottest political platforms. For this two-part series, we're not only going to cover the lights out version of this tale, but many others as well. Your brutal bathroom attacks, your ankle slashers at the mall, your Halloween Crip massacres, your trick babies left by the roadside. I'm going to take you on a long journey through old newspapers where we can find both reports attempting to debunk baseless panics, as well as many examples of real sensational crimes blamed on gang initiations that turned out to be anything but. We'll see how law enforcement worked to publicly quell the rumors that popped up again and again, while at the same time using them to explain random instances of violence, and sometimes even, along with politicians, to achieve harsh changes in local, state, and national laws that have had lasting and devastating effects on entire communities. We know that gang violence can affect random people who might be robbed or hit by stray bullets during drive-by shootings. And we know that gang initiations are very real, often involving being jumped in or beaten up to prove the wannabe's toughness. But our urban legend specifically claims that the victims are instead chosen at random as part of an organized, intentional command, an innocent human sacrifice to the great god of the gang.
Sometimes they're killers. A key man in the so-called juvenile gang.
What's that guy waiting for?
Give him a bump.
Yeah.
Hit him again.
Oh, cut it out. We're getting a jam. What's the matter? You chicken or something?
Come on, move it.
What do you punks think you're doing anyway?
What was that you called us?
Well, I just bought that car. Now look.
One of the first major national stories about this phenomenon called a gang initiation struck all the way back in March of 1935, when a group of working-class Irish immigrants, calling themselves the Dripping Daggers, frightened Bostonian drivers with their daring and dangerous antics. According to news stories printed all across America, these madcap hoodlums had participated in a gang initiation day that caused the tragic death of a World War I hero and injured his wife and infant son. In a flurry of car thefts, police said the initiates had sped through Boston at 80 miles an hour, a shocking speed, an entirely new speed for the 1930s. It was, as the story went, a risk that they had to take to become an official dripping dagger, and newspapers far and wide reported on 3 other injuries from related car accidents in, quote,
smash-ups that marked the gang's orgy.
Ultimately, after several arrests, 2 members in their late teens were arrested and sentenced to 8 years in the Concord Reformatory. But after the initial dramatic police announcements and news reports, the gang initiation angle is abandoned completely and replaced with generalizations about the group stealing and racing cars, which they did a lot, causing more damage, injuries, and even deaths. But the ritual initiation narrative was already out there, soaked into the minds of those who read the early reports. So maybe, just maybe, despite the story being almost entirely lost to time, some essential elements manifested again in the blood initiation weekend panic 60 years later. The leaders of a gang creating a specific initiation date and rites of passage with members in their cars harming innocent bystanders. The Dripping Daggers became poster children for this new crime that was not only a financial nuisance, but presented a danger to the public. Authorities wanted to create a mandatory sentence of a felony for anyone stealing a car, which not only meant definite jail time for minors, but also a provision that allowed the police to shoot at cars and car thieves at their own discretion. They used the death of the World War I veteran as their main argument for these stiffer penalties, also admonishing judges for their leniency against these rats and thugs. But while many local politicians fought for an aggressive law and order approach, the local deputy superintendent of schools and members of the National Recreation Association attempted to convince the government of the need for constructive outlets for this youthful energy. In South Boston, where the Dripping Daggers members were likely living in poverty, there was a massive need for places like community centers, public gyms, workrooms, playrooms, social rooms, and opportunities for work that were very scarce during the Great Depression. It turns out that in 1920, there had actually been $350,000, that's $5.5 million in today's money, allocated for a public gym, procured by a social and athletic organization to help address the root causes of juvenile crime. But that gym was never constructed. Instead, the city appropriated those funds and spent it all on building a fancy new speedway. The very place where the Dripping Daggers would later hold their alleged initiations, or more accurately, where they raced around randomly in stolen cars. As we'll see in more detail in Part 2, this process of avoiding funding the root causes of gang crime and focusing on increasingly harsh punishments would return again as the gang initiation folklore took on a sensational life of its own, transforming, as many crime legends do, into lurid and prejudiced stories that a chronically outraged and anxious America always seems ready to believe.
I know a place.
I know a place
Where life is good.
where life is good.
A brand new place.
A brand new place
In your neighborhood.
Your neighborhood.
Come to my place.
Where dreams come true.
My saving place can save a lot of dollars for you.
My saving place. Kmart.
Kmart.
Is your name.
Yes, it is.
In the mid-1970s, in a cluster of towns in South Carolina, a shocking rumor began to take hold, the first version of our gang initiation urban legend ever seen in print. In Anderson, stories were spreading that street gangs were performing a sick ritual to induct wannabes, instructing them to hide in department store bathrooms, in Kmart's specifically, and then castrating an unsupervised young boy. The Anderson Independent looked into these rumors and found that they had been told in each new town in the surrounding area as soon as a new Kmart opened up. According to the manager of the Anderson store, he had heard the same rumors going around for years about the Kmart in Charleston, in Charlotte, in Asheville, North Carolina, and Jackson, Tennessee. Police had also gotten reports about at least 3 other locations that were allegedly part of this macabre gang initiation. Though it's difficult to understand why the legend specifically cited Kmart, that same manager claimed, without providing evidence, that it was some kind of conspiracy meant to deter locals from shopping at these new big box stores. It's less difficult to understand why the story was about harming a child in such a gruesome way, as this came at the beginning of both the movement against child abuse that put the issue in the national spotlight and the satanic ritual abuse scare that often involved sensational, unimaginable brutality against kids. The idea of what a gang was and what a gang looked like began to change by the late 1970s. Some of the most feared groups had been white motorcycle gangs, and folklorists have actually traced oral retellings of the Lights Out initiation as being first related to the Hells Angels. But as the decade rolled on, the two most well-known street gangs, the Crips and the Bloods, started to cement themselves in Los Angeles as well as in the national consciousness.
Street gang violence is not a new phenomenon. For lawless gangs of urban youth have been a fixture of life in our bigger cities for more than a century. Today, however, the gangs are a subject of growing national concern, for their influence is no longer confined to the central cities. With startling swiftness, the blight of gang violence has spread to outlying communities. Suburban, middle-class neighborhoods once thought to be comfortably far removed from this threat to life and property.
Some have claimed that these groups emerged from the ashes of the Black Panther Party, a militant activist group who frightened much of white America with their uncompromising dedication to Black liberation, opportunity, and safety, as well as their open carrying of guns as a show of protection. However these street gangs were formed, the reality was that even after the civil rights movement in the decades prior, the Black poverty level in LA was reaching 30%, as opposed to 8% for white people. Places like the inner city neighborhoods of Los Angeles were full of young people trying to find a way to move up in the world, willing to sell drugs and protect their turf using violence against their rivals. We can see these mall bathroom rumors continue to grow larger and more explicit as the relatively racially progressive 1970s transformed into the far more racially charged conservative Reagan-era 1980s. With the popularization of fax machines, the legend had a faster and farther way to travel aside from word of mouth. These warning faxes became far more explicit in their violent descriptions and racism, so be prepared for this next part. Quote, "According to an eyewitness, the poor boy had been castrated by an ethnic gang of local youths. And subsequently, they found 3 little black boys walking through the store with a bloody penis in their pocket. As it turned out, they had cut the little white boy's penis off as an orientation, a method of getting into a gang they wanted to belong to." Of course, as far as we know, no such gang initiation has ever taken place. This is a product of the lurid American imagination. But as gang-related crimes did start to climb, usually only affecting other gang members or people who lived in the poverty-stricken urban areas where the gangs operated, the victim narrative continued to shift. Many who lived in more affluent areas became convinced that a gang member could strike at any moment as they were out picnicking on the lawn or walking to class, clutching their school books to their chests.
This is the University of Southern California, standing proudly on the threshold of its second century, proud of its independence, prepared for its future, accepting the challenge of private higher education. The University of Southern California, moving toward Century 2.
In the fall of 1981, following an uptick in campus crime, stories began popping up about an initiation that involved gangs targeting young women, and the LA Times began a series of reports on a mass panic happening on the campus of the University of Southern California. The first article began like this.
Unfounded rumors about a gang initiation rite, supposedly involving the rape and murder of USC students, have thrown the campus into what one security official said approached mass hysteria.
The freakout began, reporters believed, when a well-liked business student from Norway was shot and killed off campus during a robbery, though I could find no information about the actual perpetrator of that crime. Soon the campus-wide conversation took a sensational turn. This was not just a random murder. No, this was part of a far more sophisticated plot by organized and cold-blooded thugs who saw these students as easy prey for their psychopathic rituals. Co-eds, female faculty members, and wives of faculty were said to be targeted for rape and even murder. It was going around that members of the Latino Harpies and the Black 18th Street Gang were creeping in from the urban area of Los Angeles that was just 10 miles away, seeming to surround the affluent island of USC. The rumors continued to grow more and more dramatic. Now, dozens of women had been raped, but when campus police looked into the handful of reports that did involve USC students, they found no evidence whatsoever that any of them were gang-related. On October 22nd, a student was kidnapped from a parking structure and sexually assaulted, but the perpetrator was not identified as a gang member. Another robbery and shooting did occur off campus, witnessed by 2 USC students, but it is not known who committed that offense. Still, students started breaking parking laws to get as close to their classes as possible and to avoid walking across campus, and many women, both students and staff, started to use escorts to protect them from becoming a target. USC President James H. Zumberg tried to set the record straight, creating what he called a rumor control center, with officers going door to door on frat and sorority rows to explain that there was no evidence whatsoever for the initiation tales being told. Trying to placate the concerned parents writing and calling in from all over the country, as well as the frightened students, the USC president also announced major changes to security on campus. More emergency phones were installed, 12 more security guards were hired, 2 more police canines were brought in, and there was even talk of the college forming their own private police force. As we'll see is often the case, these changes actually undermined the intended message that this was all just one big urban legend, and instead made it look like there was, indeed, something big to be afraid of. While talking to the LA Times, one USC drama major, appropriate, pointed to a conspiracy of silence on the part of the administration. Quote, "I've heard a lot of things, that it's not a rumor, that it is in fact true. It's infuriating that they're going to jeopardize our safety for the sake of keeping admissions up. But the only thing I've heard is through the grapevine. The only thing I've heard is through the grapevine."
The Crips and the Bloods no longer are exclusively a Los Angeles problem. For years, authorities there have charged them with selling crack cocaine and committing violence. But recently, the LA gangs have gone on the road. The Crips and the Bloods have traveled east to large and small cities, including Phoenix, Denver, and Omaha.
Now let's fast forward a few years to February of 1987, when a series of alleged attacks by Black youths wielding golf clubs shook the Denver area over a 2-week period, with articles about the violence printed in almost every state. 15 crimes were grouped into what became known in the media as the golf club assaults. In one instance, a couple in their 20s was approached by 5 guys, one allegedly swinging a golf club, who went on to steal the woman's purse. 2 women were assaulted and robbed as they were getting into a car together. No golf club involved. A man walking his dog was said to have been beaten with a golf club and robbed. None of these victims were actually seriously injured, but a 53-year-old former actress named Harriet Lawyer Duvallo was murdered with a blunt object as she walked home carrying groceries. There were no witnesses to corroborate that the weapon was a golf club or who the perpetrators were, though police said they found golf clubs in the trunk of a nearby stolen car. The Denver police chief created a special task force of 70 officers dedicated to finding the suspects of the golf club assaults, which they claimed, in interviews printed in newspapers all across the country, were part of a new gang initiation. A few days later, the police announced that they had arrested 4 members of the Rolling 30 Crips gang, telling the media, quote,
"It's our understanding that to join the Crips, prospective members have to inflict injury."
At one point, based on a tip, police raided a house and took 8 people into custody, but only 3 were held at the station, with just 1 charged for his part in the assaults. Soon, news reports began showing doubt. Quote,
"Police retreated from initial comments that the suspects belonged to a notorious street gang called the Rollin' 30 Crips, which gained its name by crippling victims by beating them with canes and sticks."
Of course, that's not how the Crips got their name, but anyway. The LA Times, in a much less prominently placed article than those that had blared on about the gang initiation angle, printed this 2 months after the attacks, after the panic had calmed down. Quote,
"In response to the golf club assaults, according to Denver police, some local residents started vigilante groups to track down potential invading Crips. Today, however, Denver officials say it appears there was no link at all between the attacks and Crip activity."
Eventually, Denver County Deputy District Attorney Nate Chambers weighed in, telling the papers, quote,
"There's no evidence it was a gang initiation. The initial reports simply haven't checked out."
No one arrested by police was charged with the murder of Harriet Lawyer Duvallo, a case that remains unsolved to this very day.
Where shopping excitement brings a big smile. We got the look, the taste, and the style. You deserve to have it all. We're the center of it all.
Just 24 hours before the conclusive evidence debunking the golf club gang initiation assaults was finally, if quietly, printed, a new rumor was already spreading in Jackson, Mississippi, at their Metro Center Mall, calling back to the early iteration of our urban legend, those attacks on white boys in department store bathrooms. This time, the danger lurked just outside the mall, where white women were being preyed on by Black youths in a rite that included sexual assaults and even murder. Despite police telling the media that there was no truth to these accusations, they nonetheless beefed up security at the Metro Center Mall to calm the consumer public. 2 weeks after the local papers finally debunked the Jackson rumors, an editorial was printed by Grace Simmons, a staff writer at the Clarion Ledger, who opened with the statement, quote, "For the past several months, from inside beauty parlors to street corners, such reports have been swarming like busy bees humming around a clover patch. According to the reports, black youths have been attacking white women at the Metro Center parking lot as part of a gang initiation." According to Grace Simmons, local gun stores had sold more handguns to local women than ever before. Eventually, the head of the police's youth gang unit chimed in, telling the newspaper, quote, "The rumors have created a gang hysteria." Just a few months later, in August of 1989, the mall assault gang initiation took on a new, even more cinematic flavor. In this version, wannabe gang members were hiding underneath women's cars in the parking lot, and when they arrived back and started to unlock their doors, the initiate used a knife or razor blade to slash their ankles right at the Achilles tendon. At that point, they would pull the woman under the car to sexually assault her, murder her, or even cut off a piece of her flesh to bring back to the gang leaders as proof of their promised dedication. In a particularly memorable detail, many stories being passed around claimed that the assailants had not been caught because the pain of the slash was so great as to render the victim unable to scream.
Pet Cemetery.
Interestingly, the movie Pet Sematary, based on the Stephen King novel of the same name, came out in April of 1989, just 4 months before the papers printed information about the urban legend eventually dubbed the ankle slasher. The film features a graphic scene in which an evil child brought back from the dead saws through the Achilles tendon of a helpful neighbor. Though he is hidden under the bed instead of under a car at the mall, the fact that this movie premiered in theaters so close to the start of this specific rumor seems worth mentioning.
Where did you...
Whatever the catalyst was that helped materialize this new version, police stations and newsrooms were flooded with calls from concerned citizens, many angry that they had not publicly called attention to the rash of ankle slashings that were now taking place in other towns and cities too, especially at the Tacoma Mall in Washington state. When local law enforcement attempted to follow this rumor back to its beginning point, they found one of their own, a Pierce County Sheriff's deputy who also taught a self-defense course open to the public. Turns out that the deputy had been told the tale by one of his students, who said she knew someone who had actually been ankle slashed at the Tacoma Mall. The deputy said that he had indeed repeated the story to the majority of his 1,100 students, who repeated it to their friends and family, who repeated it to theirs, and so the legend goes and goes. In the same month, a similar rumor of gang initiates hiding under cars rocked the Indianapolis Greenwood Mall. Police traced this rumor to a teenage girl who said she'd overheard a mall security guard talking about one such case. She said she had just told a few friends, but eventually the rumor reached an employee of the Indiana Bell Telephone Company, where it turned from a whisper to a bulletin, which the worker entered into the computer system to send to a friend. But the system was available to all employees of Indiana Bell, and the official-looking bulletin spread out and reached the town of Greenwood, where the mall was located. Though it was debunked on the Indiana Bell system the very next day, all it took was 24 hours for the tale to take on a life of its own. Soon, the exact same story was circulating in Lincoln and Omaha, Nebraska, when the Lincoln Star-Journal received a mysterious flyer in the mail with no return address. Police, who continued to attempt to debunk the rumor, said they were getting up to 50 calls a day, begging them to finally intervene in this regional terror campaign that, of course, had absolutely no evidence to back it up.
Jacksonville, the bold new city of the South, with one bold problem.
A couple years later, in the summer and fall of 1992, another spate of mysterious violence broke out in Jacksonville, Florida, on a popular stretch of highway frequented by tourists on the way into the city. What were dubbed the I-295 sniper attacks became huge national news, with police telling the New York Times that they had recorded 5 shootings from moving vehicles, 15 shootings from overpasses, 15 cases of concrete, rocks, or bricks thrown at vehicles, and one instance where shooting and concrete throwing were combined. It was 4:30 p.m. on February 15th, near the middle-class suburb of Orange Park, when someone reported a gunshot on I-295. Then, a month later, in mid-March, it was reported that a large chunk of concrete had been thrown from a nearby overpass, just one exit away from where that gunshot had occurred. Throughout the month of July, police announced that there had been 5 reports of gunfire between vehicles on the highway and 11 reports of concrete dropped from overpasses, as well as 1 report from someone who claimed that they had been fired on by a sniper. In one of 2 tragic incidents connected to the crimes, a car was hit with a piece of concrete, causing it to crash into a wooded area on the side of the highway, killing the driver. A woman was severely injured when she was hit by a bullet in her jaw, fired from a car full of young men who drove up beside her. No other victims were ever listed in the news, despite the 120 reports police took down during this Florida panic, most of them remaining unsubstantiated. Throughout November, news reports said that police suspected a gang initiation to be the cause of this violence. And those words, gang initiation, were printed again and again in almost every state, often in the bolded headline. The Marion Star in Marion, Ohio, wrote,
"Motorist attacks. Gang initiation."
The Tucson Citizen in Tucson, Arizona, wrote,
2 teens held in highway attacks. Crimes may be gang initiations.
The Hawaii Tribune Herald in Hilo, Hawaii, wrote,
"Were freeway snipings gang initiations?"
And the Iola Register in Iola, Kansas, wrote,
"Gang initiation may have led to attack."
In several articles, Duval County Sheriff Jim McMillan is quoted as saying,
"We've been getting information from both the public and others, leading us to at least look at and investigate youth groups that have been in operation. Among those gangs mentioned are the English Estates Posse, Nation of Chaos, Dogjaw Posse, and Teen Les Miserables.
The American Automobile Association, AAA, put out a national advisory to all of its members, encouraging them to avoid the highway altogether. The NBC Nightly News dubbed it the Highway of Death. Florida's Welcome Center was advising anyone who stopped there to take a different route into the city. An employee was quoted as saying, "I heard one man tell me that he heard that they drive up behind you, hit your bumper, and then when you get out of the car, they hit you over the head." Eventually, the police requested help from the National Guard, who sent 150 agents armed with M16s to patrol the area with night vision goggles, flanked by camouflage vehicles and helicopters. In addition, the Florida Department of Transportation erected 10-foot-high fences on the overpasses to prevent people from dropping objects onto vehicles or shooting from above. Police eventually rounded up 20 members of the alleged English Estates Posse, though only a handful would come to face any legal action. 4 teenagers would be charged with throwing a deadly missile when they pelted a school bus with rocks, though reports do not clarify if they were thrown from an overpass or just on a side street near the interstate. 2 of the others were charged with attempted murder, said to have been the ones who shot at the woman driving on I-295 from a stolen car. Authorities were attempting to charge the 15 and 16-year-old English Estates Posse members as adults when the charges were suddenly dropped for lack of evidence and never picked up again. 2 others were charged with car theft, and police claimed that though they were not official members of the English Estates Posse, they were each associated with the gang. A story printed in newspapers across the country said that, quote,
"Although police have recovered more than a dozen weapons, none have been linked to the shooting."
According to the report, police, quote,
"displayed a pellet gun and several toy weapons officers obtained during the arrest of the 16-year-old.
Sheriff Jim McMillan was still confident, quote,
"While those arrested do not directly involve the I-295 incidents, we feel confident that the arrest of these individuals has significantly reduced the probability of reoccurrence."
Police and the National Guard claimed victory when the incidents suddenly seemed to come to a halt. But I have to wonder if the 10-foot walls they erected across the highway of death might have been what stopped the assaults, along with the constant presence of heavily armed authorities and the massive amount of national attention. Because the truth is that the charges were all eventually dropped against the English Estates Posse members, and all of the I-295 crimes remain unsolved to this day. Just a month before I-295 was dubbed the Highway of Death, another crime across the country, also blamed on a gang initiation, was shaking Stockton, California. It was the night of September 18th, and 29-year-old school secretary Kelly Freed was sitting in the passenger seat of a car driven by her friend Will Fitz when a vehicle pulled up behind them without its headlights on. Will stuck his hand out the window and gestured for the car to turn them on, and that's when the other vehicle started following them aggressively. One of the 2 Latino youths that were eventually charged with this crime pulled out a gun and shot at the back of Kelly's car, the bullet breaking through the taillight, cutting through the passenger seat, and fatally wounding her on the left side of her back. Though police and newspapers called this a gang initiation, the shooter said that he took Will's gesture as a sign of personal disrespect and claimed that he shot the car not to murder the occupants, but to scare them. And the fact that the bullet passed through the taillight and into Kelly's back was a horrific accident. But of course, we can't know if that was the truth. What we do know is that the shooter was just 16 years old and his accomplice 15, and neither were members of any gang nor participating in any kind of initiation, as later confirmed by police.
We were driving around, we were loaded.
From his tiny cell at the California Youth Authority, Carlos Ojeda, the kid who at age 13 showed the most promise, now discusses his role in one of Stockton's most notorious crimes, the killing of 29-year-old Kelly Freed.
They put their little hands up, say, turn your headlights, trying to help us out, and we took it as a disrespectful manner, and we more or less chased them down, and we shot the car. We shot one single time and hit the back of the car, and it hit our victim, Miss Kelly Freed, and it killed her.
Though he tried to escape the violence, Ojeda says it was...
The imagery provided by this story, a car of young gangbangers coming after a white school employee in the prime of her life, fit a national narrative that already existed. The local papers reported the story this way.
From the freeway to the funeral home, one sees the side of Stockton any city likes to present to the world. Quiet, tree-lined streets lined by tidy, single-family homes. The perception is of a modest yet comfortable community at peace with itself. This was Kelly Freed's Stockton. The funeral home where hundreds have come to pay last respects is near downtown, a demarcation point between her world and the less scenic, harder-edged areas where peace has been lost to gangs and crime and drugs. The two cultures clashed last Friday night, and Kelly Freed, 29, was a casualty.
Several folklorists, including urban legend patron saint Jan Brunvand and Snopes co-creator Barbara Mickelson, pointed to this misunderstood event as a likely catalyst for the big lights out panic of 1993. So many of the elements are there: the flashing headlights, the car following the Good Samaritan, and a murder by boys assumed to be gang members, that I think this event has to have informed the urban legend in some way. But I would also like to look at some major events that were playing out on a far bigger stage than the hyper-local story of Kelly Freed's untimely death. In the spring of 1992, a few months before her death, the Rodney King riots exploded across Los Angeles after a black man was severely beaten by white police officers in footage shown across news channels all over the country. The 4 officers charged with excessive force were eventually acquitted after a very public trial, and the 6 days following became the most destructive period of localized unrest in U.S. history. Just days before the riots, on April 28, 1992, leaders of various factions of the Crips and the Bloods participated in what was called the Watts Truce. They signed an official peace treaty to join the LA Black community together to end the very real gang violence and murder that continued to harm their neighborhoods.
The truce has lasted now for 3 weeks. Members of the 2 main rival gang factions, the Crips and the Bloods, now attend frequent parties together.
Come on back to the underground.
Where there had been an average of 2 gang-related killings a day, authorities confirmed that the killings by black gangs have stopped.
Well, they was like, well, hey, we got to do this. No longer should we shed our own blood on these streets because it's endless and senseless murders. It doesn't make no sense.
Our main priority was to stop the killing because that was the most harmful thing that came out of gangs.
The individual gang members continue to commit crimes.
There was, in fact, a noteworthy drop in LA gang violence following this truce, and it was replicated in many cities across the country and is now considered one of the reasons for a drop in violent crime throughout the 90s and 2000s. But the majority of law enforcement weren't keen to give credit to the gangs that they had been fighting, and some claimed that the Bloods and the Crips were joining forces not to create peace, but rather to plan a war on police, though they provided no evidence for this aside from their anonymous informants. By this point, as we'll discuss at length in part 2 of our series, the stories of inner-city terror boosted the law and order talking points that had long benefited the campaigns of politicians and district attorneys, the funding of police departments, and the bottom line of fear-baiting media. Right after the Crips and Bloods held this summit, one homicide detective told reporters a new version of the story. Quote,
"It's not as if the truce means that the gang members have found God or suddenly seen the light. They are just as violent, but they have shifted their activities away from each other and toward the community."
All of this was also taking place a few months before the presidential election between George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton.
They're a new generation of Democrats, Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and they don't think the way the old Democratic Party did. They've called for an end to welfare as we know it, so welfare can be a second chance, not a way of life. They've sent a strong signal to criminals by supporting the death penalty. Clinton, Gore, for people, for a change.
It had been 12 years since a Democrat had held the highest office in the nation, and the party had started to realize that the Republican election strategy that seemed most effective was their aggressive law and order rhetoric and policies. Many establishment Democrats believed it was time to get tough on crime and stay tough on crime. It was time for a showdown to see who was willing to go the furthest to punish the American evildoers. Bill Clinton, who was referred to sometimes as America's first black president, was relatively popular with black leaders, and his party was well aware that the greater black community was probably not going to vote for George Bush Sr. Confident that he already had the black vote, Clinton needed a way to prove to white centrist voters that regardless of this, he would not be a puppet for the radical black agenda. In an extremely well-publicized exchange between the future president and controversial black figure Jesse Jackson, Clinton shamed him for allowing Sister Souljah, an activist, rapper, and former member of Public Enemy, to speak as part of what Jackson dubbed his Rainbow Coalition panel, pointing out her inflammatory rhetoric that had recently been printed in the Washington Post. Let's listen.
You had a rap singer here last night named Sister Souljah. I defend her right to express herself through music. But her comments before and after Los Angeles were filled with the kind of hatred that you do not honor today and tonight. Just listen to this, what she said. She told the Washington Post about a month ago, and I quote, "If black people kill black people every day, why not have a week and kill white people? So you're a gang member and you normally kill somebody? Why not kill a white person?" Last year she said, "You can't call me or any black person anywhere in the world a racist. We don't have the power to do to white people what white people have done to us. And even if we did, we don't have that low-down, dirty nature. If there are any good white people, I haven't met them. Where are they? Right here in this room. That's where they are."
While Sister Souljah maintained that these statements were taken out of context, Clinton put these words in any American household paying attention to the landmark election. These comments certainly made a lot of Americans upset. Those who had just witnessed on their televisions a fiery uprising against police violence they didn't understand, and who had been inundated with sensational media stories and political speeches about gang violence, drugs, and juvenile crime, who perhaps had heard, too, legends about random innocent people just like them, targeted in bloody, heartless initiation rituals. I think that this could have all contributed to a sense that each and every Good Samaritan was in grave danger, a target anytime, any place, even deep in the safety of the American suburbs and the good small towns where things like this just don't happen. Newspaper mentions of gang initiations doubled in 1992 and then doubled again in 1993 when the lights out rumor burned through the nation, city by city, town by town, house by house, fax by fax, email by email, and whisper by whisper, all while authorities began a crackdown on street gangs that transformed the criminal justice system in the name of so-called law and order. Thank you for listening to part 1. Now here is part 2, right after some messages from our sponsors that help keep the show free for everyone. In late 1992 and early 1993, tales of a gang initiation rite known as Lights Out panicked Americans as faxes and emails were sent in towns and cities all across the country with concerning messages like this one. Police departments across the nation are being warned that this is the blood initiation weekend. Their intent is to have all the new bloods nationwide drive around on Saturday and Sunday nights with their headlights off. In order to be accepted into the gang, they have to shoot and kill all individuals in the first auto that does a courtesy flash to warn them that their lights are off. Send this to everyone you know and you might save a life.
You've got mail. You've got mail. You've got mail. You've got mail.
At the end of part 1, we talked about the months leading up to this scare, about the Rodney King riots, Bill Clinton's self-serving publicization of Sister Souljah's comments that black gang members should kill white people instead of their own, and the untimely death of California school employee Kelly Freed in a shooting that closely mimicked the Lights Out tale, while actually having nothing at all to do with gangs, let alone some kind of initiation. We covered several of these made-up gang rituals, and amazingly, just as Lights Out made its big debut, each one was brought back to life in a tangled chaos of messy rumors, crisscrossing the entire nation, with the newspaper mentions of gang initiations doubling in 1992 and then doubling again in 1993, just as the first Democrat entered the White House in 12 years, with a lot of help from a new alarmist law and order agenda.
Federal agents say the gangs are ruthless and show no remorse about shooting down innocent people who happen to get in their way.
In Oklahoma, flyers went around warning that gang members were, yet again, castrating unsupervised boys in the bathrooms of various big box stores, and that 7 of these despicable crimes had already been committed. The rumors of gang members hiding under cars at malls and department stores, waiting to slash the Achilles tendon of women and pull them under the vehicle, returned again most prominently to the Tacoma Mall in Washington state, where my own mother had worked during the first ankle slasher panic of 1989, and worked nearby during the 90s wave, visiting that mall often, along with her darling child, me. We were not ankle slashed, obviously, but we certainly did hear the rumors, and as horror fans, we certainly believed that they could be true. These tales became even more powerful when media accounts of shopping mall parking lot rapists returned to Durham, North Carolina. Police went on record claiming that they had identified 5 black men who had abducted several white women from shopping centers to sexually assault them as part of an initiation. But the police also said that they didn't know much else about these crimes. Why? Because no one had actually stepped forward as a victim. They were simply going on the calls they had received from people who had heard the rumors. Nonetheless, the headline of News and Record in Greensboro, North Carolina read,
Durham police say rape, part of gang initiation.
Police Captain Eddie Sarvis told reporters,
We have identified at least 5 members of the gang today. Some are adults and some are juveniles. But unless someone's willing to step forward and positively identify them as a rapist and testify in court, there isn't much we can do.
When none of these rumors panned out, Sergeant Eddie backtracked.
We found nothing to conclude there is an active gang in the area.
Defending himself and his department, he continued,
We did not want to create racial tension in the community. Our intentions were absolutely noble. We had no intention of causing upheaval. We just wanted women to be cautious.
Just like me, lots of other American kids were hearing these rumors too, very much including the lights out version. An 11-year-old named John from Glencrest Middle School had his intense little opinion piece published in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram on December 5th, 1993. Where will it end? I think gangs should be stopped. I also think all gang members need to be put in jail. They need to have gangs against evil and violence. Gang members shoot and kill for nothing. If this keeps up, there won't be any people left on the earth. For example, in gang initiations, some members ride around with their car lights off and shoot people that flash their lights at them. Eventually, everybody will be carrying a gun just to be safe. Around the same time, in Tempe, Arizona, children from kindergarten to 5th grade were sent to the auditorium to view a play in which a young gang wannabe struggles morally with his initiation rite to stab a pregnant woman. A senior police officer who gave himself the hip-hop moniker Police Ice started going to elementary schools with his positive message about avoiding gang life, dedicated to someone who had apparently died in an initiation ceremony.
The street gang hype is nothing but a big joke. You gotta walk the line to get off in one. To prove yourself, they stomp your butt and front you on a friendship. That's just what they do to have fun. The drive-by shooting is a gangbang thing to let the blazing gunfire thunder. It's just a coward's bum rush on a gank move tip to put a homeboy 6 feet under. What really makes it tragic is a bullet has no conscience, and when it flies, it surely will break through. To add more flowers to the caskets of families in the homes, your mom, your dad, or baby sister too. Oh, yeah,
The message today to the Bloods, the Crips, to every criminal gang preying on the innocent is clear. We mean to put you out of business, to break the backs of your organization, to stop you from terrorizing our neighborhoods and our children, to put you away for a very long time. We have just begun the job, and we do not intend to stop until we have finished.
In October of 1997, as anti-gang rhetoric continued to be a big part of political discourse, our urban legend combined forces with the annual panics around what we in the folklore industry call the Halloween sadist. You know, the candy poisoner out to get random trick-or-treaters just for the pure evil of it. According to a story circulating through the New York school system, a different kind of Halloween sadist, or rather a network of Halloween sadists, were causing quite the stir among parents, educators, and police. Rumors of prospective Bloods planning to murder young children as an All Hallows Eve initiation rite were printed in news articles and spread through the airwaves by the shock jockeys of talk radio. Although it is common for students to skip classes on Halloween, there was a marked increase in absences across the city. According to news reports, hundreds of thousands of students stayed home from school, with several campuses in the district seeing more than 80% of their students absent. In one school in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, that number was 90%. A high school for especially gifted students canceled their after-school activities and postponed a Halloween dance that was supposed to be held in their lobby. One of the two private schools in the area canceled all after-school activities, and the other canceled classes altogether. High-ranking officers of the NYPD stated that these reports were unsubstantiated, but this only brought the story to far more people and lent it legitimacy because the police were actually making public statements. Compounding that feeling was the fact that at many of these schools, police spent Halloween morning escorting children to their classrooms and spent their afternoons patrolling outside the schools, their heavy presence making it look like there was definitely something really big to be afraid of. Of course, the day after Halloween, both police and school security guards announced that there had been no violent incidents whatsoever, let alone a mass murderous gang initiation.
They are the legends we've all heard.
Gang members drive around at night with their headlights off, and when someone goes to flash from their high beams to warn them, they kill him.
The stories we've all told.
I want to know what's going on here.
Someone out there is taking all these urban legends and making them reality.
Urban legend.
Have you heard the one about the microwave?
By the next Halloween season, in September of 1998, the teen horror movie Urban Legend, one of my personal favorites, premiered in theaters. And the very next month, the lights out tale began to spread once again. Funnily enough, it was this very urban legend that provided the film with its big reveal that a couple of suburban white teenage girls had heard the tale and decided to act it out in real life to mess with a random person, leading to the accidental death of a young man through what is referred to in folklore studies as pseudo-ostension, where people already aware of an urban legend act it out in real life, creating more fake proof that the original legend is true. But this pseudo-ostension happened in a fictional movie about the falsehood of urban legends, so it seemed especially silly that at least 34 states had newspaper articles documenting the lights out hoax that was popping up in their towns and cities. But such is the life of a salacious crime legend. It's almost unstoppable. A few years later, in September of 2002, in Passaic County, New Jersey, a gang initiation rumor quickly traveled through its cluster of towns when 3 7th-grade girls told their parents that they had heard that local gangs were planning a day of bloodshed, a ritual shooting of a mother and child as they made their way to that very evening's back-to-school night. The parents called the principal, who immediately called the assistant superintendent, who immediately called local law enforcement. As the rumor continued to spread, block by block, email by email, and now in 2002, text by text, dozens, if not hundreds of citizens frantically reported the rumors to the authorities, who made their own frantic calls to stations in West Paterson, Totowa, and Fair Lawn to see if they were hearing similar stories. As the cops tried to suss out what was really going on, it took mere hours for these sinister stalkers of a helpless mother and child to transform from a nameless gang into who else but the Bloods. Then the rumor took on another dimension. A woman had actually already been murdered near East Side High School. Then it grew larger. 4 people had been murdered. No, 12 people. No, 22 people. Then it turned into 30. That Thursday, 35% of the district's 25,000 students stayed home from school. Police flooded the district's campuses, both in uniform and undercover, waiting for the chaos and gore that the rumors had promised, which, of course, never materialized. In reality, just a few hours after those first frightened parents of the 3 girls got in contact with the school, one called back. While eavesdropping on her daughter, she heard her talking to her friends, admitting that they had made the whole story up. It turned out that they had concocted a little plan to use this urban legend to their benefit, to keep their parents away from that evening's back-to-school night. They went hard, but I think we can be generous to these kids and assume that they did not mean to cause the snowballing panic that followed what they imagined would be a great excuse to get out of something they didn't want to do. I mean, who among us, right? The next day, the head of the police gang unit in Passaic County, Detective Andrew Muckle, told newspapers,
I think there was very little validity to it whatsoever. All of the people we deal with on the street said this is just not the way things happen.
Talking about the massive response to the revived urban legend, he said,
Never in my 20 years as a police officer have I ever seen something like this. The whole city came to a stop.
Nick?
Hey, honey. I love you, and we'll be home soon. Hey, where do you think you're going?
I need something to drink, Dad.
Okay, well, quick in and out, because we got to get home. You can do this.
In late August of 2007, an action movie called Death Sentence by horror director James Wan came out in theaters. The film stars Kevin Bacon as Nick Hume, a happy family man who witnesses his son's murder in a gang initiation rite and vows bloody revenge at all costs. Movie critic Roger Ebert concluded his review of Death Sentence this way, quote,
Basically, this is a movie about a lot of people shooting at each other.
The DVD would hit Blockbusters and Hollywood Videos and department store electronics sections in January of 2008. It's one of those movies that kind of gets forgotten, but according to the newspapers that quaintly used to list what was going to be on television that week, this movie played on various channels all the time for years after its release, no doubt worming its way into the minds of those who came across the sensational story and gratuitous violence.
In the 2 years Barack Obama has been campaigning for the White House, he has seldom emphasized his African-American identity. But he knows it's an issue.
Will there be some folks who probably don't vote for me because I'm black? Of course.
But this AP Yahoo poll out today suggests it's more than some folks feeling that way, and they could make the difference in Obama's run for the White House. The poll, conducted with Stanford University, found 40% of white Americans hold at least partly negative views about blacks. 20%, for example, said the word violent strongly applied to black people. 22% agreed with...
Over the next 2 years, just as America was meeting and then electing the first black president of the United States, a nationwide gang initiation panic, second only to 1993's, would see the same legends we covered pop up again and again, along with some brand new versions as well. In January 2008, several emails made the rounds across the country, stating that gangs were initiating new members by asking innocent people for directions, often in mall parking lots, and then shooting them to death. Then in March, an email calling out the Salvadoran gang MS-13 for their initiations went viral, with one example ending like this. Let all know that there is a Mexican gang initiation going on now. If someone bumps your car, do not get out. They will shoot you. This is what I got in a text message in Memphis. This is true. In October of 2008, as Halloween approached, so too did a spooky version of the gang initiation rumor. Please use extreme caution tonight. To my understanding, a local gang in Rocky Mountain, the Crypt, is out to kill 31 women by midnight tonight. A lady that attends my church who works at Golden East Crossing and mall security is warning all women to please be careful. Please pass this on to everyone you know. Then came the familiar story of department store gang murders, this time centered around Walmarts, with news articles reporting on the scare in at least 44 states. A few months later, the winner of most extreme version of the story traveled not only through email and text, but also across social media. National Gang Week is starting. If you see a baby car seat sitting on the side of the road, do not stop. These are gangs targeting people, especially women, to stop their vehicle to help a baby. They make this baby look as if it has blood on itself or on its clothes. When you get out of your vehicle in an attempt to help, the gangs jump out from cornfields or tall bushes. They have beaten women to near death and then continue other torture methods. This is not just a forward of information. It is within our area. If you do happen to see a car seat, do not stop. Call the police immediately. Please send this to everyone you know. After the 2008 and 2009 spike in gang initiation legends, they never seemed to return with the same gumption that they once had. But they do continue to circulate to this very day, including in 2022 when there was a panic on the campus of Western Michigan University. The rumor being that gang wannabes were going to kill students on Halloween. In 2023, a TikTok post went viral telling the lights out legend to thousands of users.
Posts online saying if you flash your headlights at an oncoming car driving with their lights off, you could become a victim of a deadly gang initiation. It's a warning that people have shared online and in email chains for decades. But is this a real thing?
Though the initiation angle has fallen out of style, general panics over gangs do continue, like in Halloween of 2023, when illegal immigrant Mexican gang members were apparently handing out fentanyl-laced candy to trick-or-treaters, an urban legend promoted by certain media outlets as truth and proof of this vicious threat trickling into the suburbs. To be clear, we know that drive-by shootings occur. We know there are drug-related murders. We know that there are, in fact, gang initiations. But research has long shown that the vast, vast majority of these rituals involve initiates proving their toughness with what are called jump-ins, where they're beaten up by the gang for a number of minutes. Sometimes it's true, though far more rare, that gangs may tell a prospective member to rob a random person or steal a random person's car. And in extremely rare cases, a crime like this has gone wrong, and violence or murder against a random person has occurred, but almost never in the intentional and organized way these urban legends describe. When you think about it, these urban legends start to fall apart at even the most basic questioning. Like, why would gang members want to commit crimes that would draw the most possible attention to their gang when they are generally trying to avoid the eyes of police? But at the same time, there is indeed at least one example of what appears to be a real gang initiation murder using innocent strangers. In August of 1998, 17-year-old Christina Walters and a group of wannabe Crips in Fayetteville, North Carolina, abducted 3 women unknown to them over the course of one night, stealing their cars, placing them in the trunk, robbing them, and eventually shooting them in cold blood, with 2 dying at the scene and 1 surviving to tell her story. Though the details of this night are messy, seeming at times to be closer to 3 robberies gone wrong than some kind of official ritual, police and prosecutors have maintained that they believe these killings to be part of an intentional initiation rite. And here's why. They said that the group used bullets that were tipped with blue nail polish, and traces of that nail polish were found in the wounds of the victim and in Christina Walters' trailer. I could find no other mentions anywhere in newspapers or online about Crips using blue-tipped bullets for initiations or crimes, but there isn't good enough evidence to debunk this particular instance. But regardless, long before this seemingly real-life example of the kind of legends that we've been telling, the rumors of gang initiations were already playing their part in massive changes to the criminal justice system.
The LA police have spent millions of dollars in the campaign, putting more officers on the street, putting their specialized crash unit, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, to work on a new system of developing intelligence, creating a new computer program.
I think it's fair to say that the sweeping laws imposed through the 80s and 90s to combat the gang problem were influenced by stories of psychopathic members who are willing to kill, rape, and maim innocent strangers for what amounts to a sinister game. As these decades led to the U.S. claiming the highest rate of imprisonment in the world, politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, made bold claims about the threat of these savage young criminals, some eventually referring to them as super predators, violent inner-city youth who would bring about an almost apocalyptic crime wave that simply never materialized. states all across the country began creating specific gang task forces within their police departments, and these officers started creating gang databases, official lists of gang members in their jurisdictions, as well as anyone they thought could possibly be associated with a gang. Any crimes that appeared gang-related could land a person in the database, but so could colors of clothing, tattoos, who they were seen hanging out with, what family they belonged to, where they hung out, where they lived, and what they drew on the margins of their notebooks at school. And since the list was based entirely on the unsupervised opinion of cops, pretty much anything could be considered suspicious. Being in the database meant that police were allowed to detain suspected members at their own discretion without the kind of evidence they would need to detain someone not in the database. Higher bail was automatically set for those on the list compared to those who were not, even if they committed an identical crime. By 2003, after more than 2 decades of gang panic, a shocking 47% of Black men aged 21 to 24 living in LA County were listed in the gang database versus 0.5% of white men in the same age group.
And new tonight, the LAPD is placing a moratorium on entries into and the use of the Cal gang system. That's a database designed to identify and track gang members. The LAPD has been accused of misusing the system, and tonight the department said the accuracy of the database has been called into question.
In 2018, it was revealed that 99% of the thousands of people in the New York City gang database were Black or Latino, despite law enforcement's long-standing claim that 11 to 15% of gang members are white. However, other surveys conducted by agencies independent of government authority sources estimate that number to be closer to 40%. In either case, it's clear that white alleged gang members are very underrepresented, with skinhead and motorcycle gangs almost never included. An audit of California's gang database in 2016 showed unconscionable and confusing reporting errors, with 42 infants included on the list, more than half of whom were listed as members who had admitted their membership in a gang. In most cases, there is no clear-cut way to get removed from these databases, not for those who were wrongly accused or those who were at one time members of a gang but have since cut ties with the group. The racial bias present in the New York and LA databases is not a standalone issue. Cities across the country show similar statistics. In California in 1987, politicians and law enforcement created the Street Terrorism Enforcement and Prevention Act, known as STEP, which was the beginning of what was called gang enhancement sentencing. These laws, mimicked in other cities across the country, made it so that those identified by authorities as gang members could face much harsher sentencing. The additional prison time added onto the sentence could be anywhere from 3 to 4 years for nonviolent felonies, 10 years for more serious felonies, and anywhere from 15 years to life for certain violent crimes, but also for home invasion robberies and carjackings. This means that the enhancement could actually be longer than the sentence for the actual crime committed. Throughout the 1990s, civil injunctions also became a major part of the war against gangs. They allowed courts in the United States to keep gang members in their cities from doing things that were otherwise perfectly legal. These injunctions could be slapped on entire gangs themselves, a broad category that could be used against anyone a police officer believed to be part of a criminal organization, and they were often placed on entire entire housing projects or entire neighborhoods. Those who were served injunctions could be barred from things as simple as wearing certain kinds of clothing, making certain hand gestures, standing in groups numbering 2 or more, and standing in a public area for more than 5 minutes. They could actually be arrested and charged with crimes under these injunctions. And since it was technically a civil order and not a criminal one, they were not entitled to use a public defender. In most of the stories that we've told over these 2 episodes, those assumed to be gang members were under the age of 18. In the 90s, Democrats and Republicans crossed the aisle and worked together to allow more and more minors to be tried as adults, to build more juvenile prison cells, to eliminate parole for youth offenders convicted of felonies, some just 14 years old. In addition to prosecutors being allowed to decide to try minors as adults, 45 states changed their juvenile life without parole laws. The United States is actually one of only a handful of countries in the entire world that allow children to be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, an international treaty that forbids this practice, has been ratified by every UN country but the US, with 132 countries forbidding the practice entirely. In 2005, there were 13 countries that allowed juvenile life without parole sentences, but only 12 youths in the entire world were sentenced this way, while in the U.S., that number was 2,225. According to the Human Rights Watch, between 1985 and 2001, minors convicted of murder were more likely to be sentenced to life in prison than adults convicted of the same crime. Unsurprisingly, Black minors were sentenced to life without parole at rates estimated to be 10 times greater than their white counterparts. In California, where the gang laws were some of the harshest and most widely used, that number was greater than 22 times. In Pennsylvania, Latino minors were 10 times more likely to receive life without parole than white minors convicted of the same crimes. Of course, there are many gang members of all races that commit horrible acts, and there's no reason to paint these groups in broad strokes of a victim narrative. But having some kind of gang association by no means renders one a violent criminal, and those who join gangs are most often born into communities that lack funding for education, lack job training and job prospects, as well as affordable housing. Neither gang injunctions nor gang databases nor harsher sentences for gang-related crimes for minors have proved to be effective tools of fighting gang crime. In fact, these laws further harm neighborhoods by locking up parents and leaving children to fend for themselves, and by arresting children who are put into the system before they turn 18, and when they're released, face even greater hardships, feeding them back into gangs that exist as one of the only alternatives. What has been effective in curbing gang violence is the choice to use public funds to create gang prevention programs that include improving public schools, funding after-school programs, providing further educational opportunities, providing job training, and increasing job prospects, as well as providing affordable housing. Luckily, these gang databases and gang enhancement sentences have come under the microscope in recent years, and major changes have accompanied this, though these laws are still in action in different jurisdictions across America, despite the fact that statistics show that this type of crime has been on the decline for decades. But meaningfully addressing the underlying causes of gang violence is still far from a priority, and questions remain about exactly what was going on behind the scenes of these anti-gang laws and why.
The California Department of Justice says it's now blocking the LAPD's use of its statewide gang database after some LAPD officers were caught submitting falsified data about innocent people. The 3 officers have been charged, and more than a dozen other officers could face charges.
This follows the filing of conspiracy, false police report, and fabricated evidence charges against 3 LAPD officers last week, and a new audit that shows lots of other data in the gang system is unreliable.
Now, yesterday we reported that another 16 LAPD officers may still face criminal charges. That's in addition to the 3 charged last week, all of them suspected of turning in interview reports that falsely labeled people as gang members when they were not, or...
In an article in the Commercial Appeal out of Memphis, Tennessee in March of 1997 titled,
Memphis Police Jolt Lawmakers with Report on Gang Initiations.
4 officers from the Memphis Police Department's gang unit participated in a bipartisan hearing with lawmakers in which they presented a series of apparent methods of violent gang rituals that involved the harming and killing of innocent civilians. Sergeant Richard Parker claimed that cars of gang members drove around with their headlights off, following home and shooting to death whatever Good Samaritan flashed them a gentle reminder. Quote,
It was considered easy to kill a rival gang member, but it would show heart to kill an innocent bystander.
He continued,
It's no longer an inner city problem. It's in the suburbs.
Democratic Representative Henry Brooks responded during the hearings, quote,
The community is ready to get behind this. People are afraid to come out of their houses and go to church on Sunday evenings because of gangs.
This is very important because these hearings were in support of new legislation in favor of gang enhancement sentencing. In the midst of hysteria, folklorists have been one of the groups to push back against sensational falsehoods that have material consequences, like one John M. Shaw, who wrote a response in the Commercial Appeal newspaper following these hearings, pointing to several versions of this urban legend that had circulated for years. Quote, It is disconcerting to me that local law enforcement, which is supposed to preserve the public peace, would promote mass hysteria and fear of Black youth by repeating stories of gang initiation methods of doubtful validity. Then he goes on to talk about the different faxes that had circulated for years about bogus gang initiations, saying that the police speeches at the hearing, quote, seem a not-so-subtle attempt to inflame already volatile race relations in our nation. When we look at the clear racial coding in these legends, sometimes explicit, almost always implied, it makes sense to me that the main location of these alleged initiations are malls and department stores, public bathrooms, parking lots, and roadways, areas shared by all kinds of people, melting pots of culture where classes, races, and ages mix. It is often at these points of tension between strangers of different cultures that crime legends flourish. These pieces of contemporary folklore take the violence that can and does happen within gang cultures and the communities where gangs operate and refer that pain to those who have nothing at all to do with gangs, and the victims suddenly look more like affluent white people, suburban moms and their children, always implied to be innocent bystanders in a world gone mad. If the victims look like this and the perpetrators look like that, if the stories are sensationalized enough, law and order policy will be more successful for Republicans and Democrats alike, and will carry those seeking political or financial power to new heights, as we've seen time and time again. These gang initiation stories remind me of the accusations of ritual sacrifices and frightening crimes against innocent women and children that have, for centuries, been leveled against major religions and identity groups by those of opposing beliefs, something still very much a tactic we see today. We create or believe this kind of propaganda when we are engaged in a war, both abroad and at home, a war on terror, a war on crime, a war on drugs, a war on juvenile delinquents, a war on gangs. All of it requires a kind of sweeping dehumanization, making any human being, even loosely associated with our so-called enemies, into irredeemable monsters, into collateral damage. When we demonize entire groups of people for the violent actions of a few, or for cinematic stories of violence that are entirely false, we make excuses for sweeping punishments that can ravage communities who already lack institutional power. At worst, our urban legends express a subconscious fear of cultural others, and though police do work to publicly debunk these untrue stories, it is the police, the greater political system, and the media at large that have conditioned us to believe that these legends could be true in the first place. Think of little John, that 7th grader writing to the paper in 1993, convinced that the lights out urban legend was true, convinced that gang members were coming to kill everyone on the earth. And like the sweeping anti-gang legislation has shown, we don't know how to differentiate between a threat and someone who looks like a threat. And it's obvious that those who benefit most from our fear don't want us to. Contemporary folklore expert and one of my biggest influences, Joel Best, was one of the main academics responsible for compiling and analyzing these gang initiation rumors back in the 1990s. In his 1999 book, Random Violence, he explained American culture's vision of these street gangs as they apply to a greater national narrative. Quote, "Ours is a society characterized by bureaucratic institutions. When we envision evil, it has an almost bureaucratic face. We describe modern gangs in these terms. Gangs are secretive, they are large and spreading. Their business is calculated, deliberate, and structured. Dealing in drugs, violence, and other crime, they form great, powerful hierarchies through super gang alliances, and their members have a rich, secretive culture of colors, gang signs, and initiation rites." The Street Terrorism Enforcement and Prevention Act that was passed in LA in 1988 defined a gang as, quote, "an ongoing organization, association, or group with 3 or more persons, whether formal or informal, having as one of its primary activities the commission of one or more crimes, having a common name or common identifying sign or symbol, and whose members individually or collectively engage in or have engaged in a pattern of criminal gang activity." It sounds like this definition could stretch far beyond the Bloods and the Crips and could encompass many of our American bureaucracies. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but perhaps we imagine evil to have a bureaucratic face because it does, locking those who decide to become part of the political gang into a system that forces them to lose their empathy until they are numb to the harm that they cause. Several of our urban legends today are cautionary tales, stories that warn us not to commit acts of service toward the community. Don't flash your headlights to remind a fellow driver to turn theirs on. Don't help anyone with directions, and do not try to save a baby from the side of the road, lest your good deed be punished with an unimaginable vengeance by those nameless and faceless hordes of sociopathic boogeymen. In these stories, there is a gang conspiracy against us. There are forces out there ready to harm us for nothing more than an advance in status. In our greater American story, for many, perhaps for most, this is true. But the gang looks very different from the ones in our urban legend today. So, if we flash an invitation to those that need it, we might together be able to illuminate our darkest highways. Maybe instead of being killed, we survive. Maybe we see who, all along, has really been behind the wheel, white-knuckled and lost to a terrible game, unable or unwilling now to finally turn on the light. This was American Hysteria. Thank you so much for listening to this 2-part series. And remember, you can go to immigrantjustice.org/knowyourrights for more information, and you can research how to responsibly report potential ICE raids in your state. American Hysteria is written, produced, and hosted by me, Chelsey Weber-Smith. Our producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer and sound designer is Riley Swedelius-Smith. And our voice actor is Will Rogers. Thanks as always for listening, and I hope you have a great